Hey folks, I'm JC, and today I'm going to review another classic old school adventure, Orcslayer, a fantasy adventure written almost 40 years ago and known for being the very first adventure written for GURPS. Well, sort of, I'll get to that. In Orcslayer, warriors must stop bloodthirsty orcs from conquering the kingdom, but not all is as it seems, because the orcs are led by a mysterious set of individuals that are determined to keep their plans a secret. Orcslayer is an epic adventure that takes the PCs on a journey over hundreds of miles where they'll visit mystic forests, sweltering deserts, fortified castles, and lonely swamps, and more too. And that's a lot to pack into a single adventure. So does Orcslayer pull all of that off? Does it hold up by today's standards? Is it even worth dusting this one off again and playing with a group of friends? Well, unsheath your swords of puissance and grab your mighty axes, because not only am I going to give you a full review of Orcslayer, but I'll give you GMs some tips and tricks on how to run this one like a pro. Orcslayer was written way back in 1985, and it was written by Warren Spector and Steve Jackson, two legends of the game industry. Steve Jackson, of course, is known for designing lots of tabletop classics that are still played today, ranging from GURPS itself to Car Wars to the Munchkin card game. Warren Spector, well, he's actually now known more as a video game luminary, and he's been the brains behind some of the industry's most classic RPG video games like Deus Ex, System Shock, and Epic Mickey. So you can imagine there's a lot of expectations for this adventure knowing that those two guys were the brains behind it. Well, Orcslayer is about 26 pages long, and it's divided into 9 chapters. In my experience, it takes about 3 or 4 sessions to get a group through Orcslayer, just because each of those chapters is pretty robust. They each feature some role-playing encounters, some exploration, and usually a pretty big involved set-piece battle. Now, before I go into the narrative of what happens in Orcslayer, I have to take a moment and talk a little bit about the how and the why this adventure was created, since that's kind of key to understanding what it was trying to do back in 1985. Way back in 1983, Steve Jackson was just coming off designing The Fantasy Trip, an RPG that was designed for D&D fans who were looking for something a little more grounded and a lot less fiddly. Well, he had a problem because the Fantasy Trip's publisher, Metagaming, had just gone out of business and he couldn't get the rights back. So he aspired to make a follow-on role-playing game, but this time one that could span all genres that role players are interested in, from fantasy to science fiction to post-apocalyptic, with just one game system. Well, he dubbed this new game GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, because he never found a better name for it. However, GURPS, in all of its multi-genre glory, wasn't quite ready yet, so he first released a game called Man to Man, which was basically just the combat system of GURPS, but tuned for fantasy and medieval combat. Man to Man was kind of a cross between an RPG and a tactical combat game, and it didn't include rules for things like non-combat skills or magic or exotic powers. Well, in today's lingo, think about Man to Man as being the early access version of GURPS, although with way less bugs than what you'd normally find in an early access game today. When I came across Man to Man back in the 80s, I vividly remember being gripped by it because the game system felt very real. I could finally design a mighty barbarian who, if he had a high enough sword skill, could cut down opponents in a single blow and easily parry their attacks without wearing any armor at all. This was a very big deal for whatever reason to a teenage JC who was always sad that Dungeons and Dragons never really had the feel of his favorite Conan movies. Anyway, because Orcslayer was the first adventure for man-to-man / proto-GURPS, it spends a lot of time explaining how to run a game. Every encounter in Orcslayer is filled with GM advice on villain tactics, what happens if the PCs go off the rails, and what happens if PCs die at certain times, etc. In 1985, this was amazing because a lot of the adventures written at the time for games like D&D just didn't spend a lot of time trying to help dungeon masters figure it out or set up interesting tactical encounters for the players. They just kind of let the talented GMs figure all that out. So Orcslayer just felt so incredibly accessible compared to those other RPG adventures. Now, obviously by today's standards, this isn't as special. Lots of adventures do spend some time giving the game masters tips on how to run them, but even by today's standards, Orcslayer is pretty darn good in this regard. The adventure kicks off at midnight, where the PCs, who are presumed to be young warriors visiting a local lord's castle, they're bedding down for the night when suddenly they're awakened by the sound of orcs inside the castle. These orcs running through the halls looking for prisoners to drag back to their camp. Chaos has completely broken out and the PCs must fend off the invaders. After the battle, the castle's Lord Peridor explains that he believes this attack is a signal that the Second Great Orc War is about to begin. And he urges the PCs to travel 700 miles to Castle Defiant, which is like a keep that's dangerously close to orc territory, to alert the Lord there and rally his soldiers. And if there were captives taken, which probably include Lord Peridor's own daughter, Bronwyn, that he prays that the PCs try to rescue her, catching up to the orcs. Now, Lord Peridor, of course, would prefer to send a seasoned group of knights on this dangerous journey, but they all just happen to conveniently be away at a tournament far away. So it's the PC's job to accept this mission. The PCs won't arrive at Castle Defiant for several chapters. And so these chapters outline the long journey that the PCs have to endure. They have to navigate an ancient forest where they can save elves from a band of orcs, a desert wasteland where they can resupply with a caravan while avoiding vicious, like man-eating reptile men, and then they finally encounter a group of orcs that are led by a sadistic dwarf, giving them the hint that the orcs may not be operating alone. All of these encounters blend role-playing with a well-designed set-piece combat encounter. They're all fun and none of the battles are pushovers. In fact, when I've run Orcslayer, I've usually lost a PC or two along the way by the time they get to Castle Defiant, with the most common death coming from PCs who underestimate those man-eating desert reptile men. Look, my friend, 2 lizard men down there all by themselves. Let's kill them. How many hit points could they possibly have? What's neat, by the way, is that if the PCs die along the road, they're encouraged to create new characters from the lands they're visiting. So suddenly the party goes from a bunch of like young human squires to include elves and reptile men, and maybe even a sympathetic hobgoblin or orc. I thought this was pretty cool. When the PCs finally arrive at Castle Defiant, located deep in the heart of Orcland, they find it under siege. The PCs have to dodge some orc skirmishers and race into the castle, which is clearly gearing up for a prolonged fight with hundreds of these orcs. The Siege of Castle Defiant is one of my favorite set-piece battles in this adventure, with the PCs on the walls given oil flasks to like rain down hell on those orcs who have arrived with a massive battering ram as other orcs are like rushing up the stairs and breaking into the castle. If run right, this battle feels just like the Battle of Helm's Deep, at a slightly smaller scale, but it's a great fight, and one where if I did have an extra player to use as an adversary, I might do it, since the stakes are so high and it's kind of tactically complex, and I just love the idea of the PCs like fighting for their lives here in a fit of desperation. I'll also add that, like a lot of the other encounters, the Siege of Castle Defiant can be lost or won. It's nice that Orcslayer just doesn't assume that the PCs like win every fight, especially this one. A couple of times I've run this, the PCs have been overcome by orcs and had to make like a run for it off the battle map where they have to like hide out in the hills and plan a counterattack. But if the siege is won, then the Lord of Castle Defiant celebrates the PCs as heroes, and either way, that Lord of Castle Defiant urges the PCs that they have to go find the hidden stronghold of the orcs and put an end to their aggression. With 3 chapters left, well, this is a bit where the adventure starts to come off the rails just a little bit. Up until now, the PC's motivations have all made sense. Like, they're basically messengers sent across the land to warn a lonely castle of an invasion and maybe recover some of the prisoners that the orcs took along the way. That all makes sense. But now that orc armies are involved, the adventure doesn't do a great job of pushing the heroes forward to that final battle with the orcs in a logical way. That no sane group of adventurers is going to listen to Lord Kieran of Castle Defiant as he asks them to go by themselves to chase an army of orcs back to a hidden stronghold far away. Ah, good, my friends, come in. Welcome to my war council. The plan is simple. There's 1,000 orcs retreating back to their citadel. I'd like for you to follow them, and maybe when you get there, kill 600-700 of them. That'll work good. Then I'll be able to help after that. Leave at dawn? I have your horses ready. Let me explain how the adventure wants this to play out, and then I'll show you how I tweak it to make it play a little better. What's supposed to happen is that the PCs now find the location of that orc stronghold, and they're sent there to, well, I'm not totally sure, maybe rescue the prisoners. To get there, the PCs have to cross the dangerous acid swamps of sulfur, which is a place known for pools of thick, soupy acid with only Reptile Man hide protecting from the dangers there. Yeah, it's a little brutal that the PCs are expected to skin the reptile men they killed before and wear them as armor, but it was the 80s. That kind of stuff was just more okay. The acid swamp is also home to the Costigus, an intelligent, four-armed swamp monster that regenerates its tentacles and is only vulnerable in its eyes. The swamp chapter here is actually just really fun. It's one of my favorite chapters, and a giant tentacle monster is surely going to surprise the players at this point. But it does feel like where it's inserted, it just feels a little bit random since it's kind of just between the siege of Castle Defiant and that final battle with the orcs. But anyway, once the PCs emerge from the swamp, they'll see several massive craters in the Badlands that are just filled with orc villages and a jutting orc stronghold. After interrogating a cowardly orc that they happen to find along the road, the heroes will find out that there's a secret entrance into that stronghold where the leader of the orcs, an insane dwarf named Bolgan, is holding a dozen or so prisoners. They're scions of the various families in the land, mostly pretty princesses. And there's a secret door that leads through the crater and into the dungeons of that stronghold where the PCs can fight Bolgan, rescue the prisoners, and escape back to Castle Defiant, ending the adventure. Now, these last few chapters, they're not terrible, but they definitely have some issues. First, the adventure really counts on the PCs caring about rescuing those prisoners. But at this point, the PCs have traveled 700 miles after some orcs, and they're likely to assume that they're all dead. And because they never really got time to spend with those prisoners, then they're just not going to care as much. Second, everything here in these last few chapters feels very coincidental. Lord Kieran, who just fought off a siege at Castle Defiant, just can't find an army to go finish the job of the orcs. This cowardly orc that the PCs run across just happens to know the secret entrance into the stronghold. And the prisoners are just all right there in the catacombs waiting to be rescued along with the leader of the dwarves, and once he's killed, the orcs just kind of scatter. These last chapters just lose all that forward momentum that the adventure had, and it just doesn't give the players the same amount of agency that those early parts had either. But here's how I tweak this to make the ending work better, set up the villain a little earlier, and just make everything just a little bit more epic. The horses are ready. You can leave at dawn. Oh, I got you. Oh my God. You thought I was serious. No. I've got a way better plan than that, I promise. Oh my, you should have seen the look on your faces. Oh my God. I'm a little embarrassed now, guys. They totally thought that was my plan. So I make tweaks to the ending of Orcslayer to kind of make the ending a little better, set up the villain a little earlier, and just make everything feel a little bit more epic. First, after the siege at Castle Defiant, I have the PCs discover that the orcs are clearly armed with some fine dwarven weaponry. Lord Kieran is terrified that the orcs have a supply of this weaponry, and after some examination discovers that it's clearly sourced from old dwarven ruins that were once located in a crater about 50 miles or so from Castle Defiant. He assumes that the orcs have raided those mines and recovered this weaponry, and he's just really concerned that there are dwarves helping the orcs anyway. He's too afraid to make a move on that stronghold and send the remnants of his army there because he's fearing that maybe there's a combined army of orcs and evil dwarves and his troops would be overwhelmed. Suddenly, as he's debating what to do about this problem that he thinks he has, his scouts enter the room and they report that a small band of orcs, led by a dwarf, has been spotted entering the swamps to the west. Lord Kieran sends the PCs into the swamp to capture and interrogate that dwarf. His capture is critical to creating a plan against the orcs and maybe their dwarf allies. This makes that trip into the Sulphur Swamp feel a lot more urgent and important. Once in the swamp, the PCs discover that those orcs are dead, killed by the Costigus, that swamp monster. And after a fight with this Costigus, the PCs will find a survivor, likely that dwarf, who spills the beans on Bolgan's plan. The angry, vengeful Bolgan the dwarf, he explains, has rallied the orcs to get revenge on his father, who cast him out decades ago. And to do this, though, he needs to better equip the orcs. So he's using his expertise and old knowledge to excavate those old dwarf ruins in that crater. Now, orcs, much to Bolgan's annoyance, are terrible miners. They have no patience or skill for it. So he had to go capture slaves, as well as a few nobles here and there, to do the excavation. The captured dwarf gloats that Bolgan is just a day away from excavating this grand lost chamber that will bring thousands of fine dwarven or even magical weapons to the orcs in the region. The prisoner, after some interrogation, will reveal that hidden entrance into those catacombs in the mine. So now the PCs are suddenly on a time limit. Like, they don't have a lot of time to go back to the castle and explain what was going on. They have to stop Bolgan before he can get into that hidden chamber. So now the final fight with Bolgan happens mostly like the adventure already spells out. The PCs enter the catacombs, they free the prisoners, and they fight Bolgan and his orcs, and also some evil dwarf miners who are helping him tunnel deeper. With Bolgan and the outcast dwarf miners all killed, the orcs just don't have the expertise to mine any further, and they don't have the leadership they really require, and so they'll scatter harmlessly back to their homeland, and that war, the Second Great Orc War, will be stopped. By the way, I have to mention this. In a funny ending to this adventure, it even mentions that there's a chance with Bolgan dead, the PCs all turn on each other, and the adventure ends in a bloody player versus player combat. I thought this was just like a hysterical quirk of an old school module that still hadn't quite escaped from its wargaming roots. Well guys, that's almost the end of Orcslayer, but there's one more surprise. You see, the whole time the elves, you guys over here, have been really annoyed at the humans, you guys are over here, and so you're gonna backstab them, we're gonna fight and see who survives. Oh, and the reptile man, like, well, you're just hungry, so you're just gonna wade in there and kill your friends too. It's gonna be a great ending to this adventure. You guys ready? But really, I don't suggest you do that. So that's Orcslayer. First, let's talk about the things I like about this adventure. It's still a great introductory adventure. It's great for new GMs because you can just read a chapter or two and just be ready to run it. You don't have to digest this entire adventure to run a great Orcslayer session. The chapter-based format, the GM advice, and the streamlined encounters mean you barely need to prepare. Oh, and by the way, for those of you who do want to run this adventure over virtual tabletop, you can download my assets for this adventure in the link in the description below. Go get them, it'll make your life easier. Orcslayer is also a great introductory adventure for new players. Orcslayer moves as fast as the players want, and there's a good variety to its encounters. Now, obviously it is designed more for players who love combat and action. I'm not sure I'd run it for players who want to investigate and roleplay, but for players who imagine their heroes to be like the ones from Lord of the Rings or Conan, this is a great adventure for them. It's also still a good introduction to GURPS, even in its latest 4th edition incarnation, which was written decades later. Orcslayer is 95% compatible with modern GURPS and will give players a good feel about how GURPS differs from games like Dungeons & Dragons. Mainly that those orc battles will always be life or death fights that require coordination and tactics. Players who just charge into the battles in Orcslayer without regard for the danger will probably be cut down pretty fast. I like that, but again, if you're not into that sort of like, gritty realism, heroic realism, like maybe it's not for you. So I think Orcslayer is a no-brainer to run for new folks. For experienced role players, I'm kind of on the fence. I'm not so sure, unless your players are really looking for an old school Renaissance kind of classic RPG feel, or are nostalgic, or if you're willing to make some modifications to just add more complexity and modernize it a little bit. For example, there are a lot of fantasy tropes in this adventure, and some of them have just become stale over the last few decades, or just haven't aged super well. The PCs are the only heroes in the land, the orcs are utterly mindless brutes who target pretty women as their hostages. Now, I don't have a huge problem with any of that because I'm a fan of like classic sword and sorcery style fiction, but even I make some changes to add some twists for modern audiences. So, for example, the last time I ran this, after that initial orc attack, I told the players that they are just one of a half dozen different groups sent out to be messengers because Lord Peridor expects most of them not to survive. And then I play up the rivalry with these other groups over the course of the adventure. Adds a nice twist and role-playing and a little bit of a race element to the game. And while I still keep the orcs as brutish villains, I make their prisoners a more eclectic bunch, like they're laborers and there's royal hostages, and each is somehow connected to an old grudge that evil dwarf Bolgan has. Like there's a history of why he's targeting certain people that the PCs can put together. I also add more NPCs into the adventure, like an alchemist in that desert caravan who's secretly working for Bolgan and tries to poison the PCs. And then when the PCs inevitably stop his plan, he'll give them more tidbits about Bolgan's plot, long before the adventure would normally introduce that. These sorts of minor tweaks just modernize the adventure a little bit. And the changes also help update Orcslayer to GURPS 4th edition, where characters are going to just be more varied, outfitted with social skills and investigative skills and advantages and wealth and status and reputation and maybe even magic, all the stuff that didn't exist when Man-to-Man was written back in the mid-80s. Oh, and one more suggestion for any group of players. Since orcs are the main villain of Orcslayer, some players might get to a point where they're like, oh, great, more orcs to fight. Orcslayer just doesn't have the variety of foes that experienced role players will expect. The presence of evil dwarves helps, and so do the changes I mentioned, where I start giving the orcs some dwarven equipment as the adventure goes on. But really, Orcslayer is limited by the fact that it was designed for man-to-man, which really didn't have rules for things beyond sword and axe-wielding like opponents. But if I'm running this for players today using full-on GURPS, then I'm going to add some extra villains here and there to the campaign. I often include a spell-casting hobgoblin in the Elfwoods who flings like curses at the PCs. I add wolf riders to the Siege of Castle Defiant, and even a giant like demonic half-troll miner in the final encounter. This just adds some necessary variety as the adventure goes on. But what I'll end with is that I think it's great that Orcslayer has such a solid structure that it lets you as a GM like make any changes you really want to it without messing it up. It's just not a fragile adventure at all. And you can yank out whole chapters and throw in ones of your own and make some changes, and the framework of this adventure just always still holds up. And that's impressive, even by today's standards. So in the end, I'd say Orcslayer is great for players who love combat and action encounters, especially great for new players, and also good for GMs who like to modify and fiddle with an adventure without a real risk of screwing anything up. Well, I hope that review was helpful. If you'd like to see more old school reviews like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Victory against the orcs depends on it. And if you've played or run an Orcslayer, be sure to let me know in the comments below what your experience was like. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, if the adventure ends early, rather than suggest that your players team up by species and hack each other to bloody bits, maybe just play a board game.